speaking in front of large groups, and now I'm looking at a computer screen with all my pictures on it. So this should be pretty comfortable. If anybody does levitate sometime during this presentation, please let the rest of us know, though. I've been doing Hemingway tours and historical tours for over 20 years now. I just love Petoskey, love the area up here. Along the way, it seems I've kind of become a collector of ghost stories of our area, also paranormal, noticing reoccurring experiences from my guests that have joined at other tours. And what's funny for me is that I noticed that these people have had these experiences. They have no way of knowing that others have shared almost the same experiences with me over the years. So like there's these themes to different buildings, different rooms, and different hotels and different venues around town. And I've started collecting all these stories and corroborating them, and I vet them quite heavily. So everything I tell you tonight will be accurate as best as I can vouch for, as we are dealing with the paranormal. We live in an area that's so rich with such diverse history, which I believe probably contributes to all the lingering energy we experience in our area. We're the second oldest region in the United States. Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan being probably the second incorporated town in the United States. By 1630, 1620, we have Joliet, Nicollet, Marquette passing by Cross Village. They're coming through here. That's actually the marker that they would have seen, the original crooked tree, right just about where that church is standing there. As you're kind of paying attention to some of these stories, again, Joliet, Nicollet, Marquette, we're going back such a long range here, 400 years. And if you've ever walked past the city park, or I'm sorry, the Perry Hotel, there's this little boulder over there. And this is a trail that marks a boulder that marks the Native American trail. And that probably goes back maybe 5,000 to 6,000 years, sometime between when the glaciers retreated 10,000 years ago and when we started having Native Americans coming to this area. That's why I usually start my presentations. But of course, if you've been watching the paper lately, there's been some evidence that there was a civilization possibly at the Straits of Mackinac that goes back even prior to that glacier. Maybe we're talking tens of 20s of thousands of years going back now. It'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out. This trail that we're looking at here, this marker, if you ever get past the Perry Hotel, you'll see a couple cannons. This marks the 119 corridor and the 131 corridor. That was used for thousands of years as a trail system. As you head back, let's think about 1763, during Pontiac's Rebellion, we have the uprising of the Native Americans. They weren't too thrilled with the English, and they will march up 119 following this marker, and that will lead to the massacre at Fort Michilimackinac. We have such a strong history with Native Americans in this area. At any given time, you had 20 tribes coming here sometimes in the summer to resort and fish.
It automatically picks up on audio.
The council tree, as it says here, beneath this tree, tribal chiefs of the Menominee, Chippewa, and Ottawa held council in the 1763 following the massacre at Fort Michilimackinac. Devil's Elbow. I've had many Native American historians tell me that some of their members don't like to go up to Devil's Elbow in the evening. They can hear the spirits of their deceased ancestors, as this old sign actually shows there. And if you've traveled up there, you've seen these signs. Jumping forward a little bit, 1874, this is one of the older pictures of Bayview. I think these women have more clothing on than there's cloth in these tents. Bayview was founded in 1874 by Samuel Knapp. He was a Methodist from Jackson, Michigan. Eventually turned into a Chautauqua in the 1880s. If you know anything about the Chautauqua, the pillars are religion, health, exercise, the arts. There were 5 hotels at any given time in Bayview. If you look historically at places that seem to harbor energy, it's churches, hotels, theaters, places where energy has been spent, either good or bad. And that kind of sums up Bayview in a sense. All those summer people coming there, Helen Keller, Booker T. Washington, Hugo Gossman, who was exiled from Vienna by Adolf Hitler. Just great and creative minds coming here for the last 145, 155 summers, and that tradition that brings people back year after year after year. Some of the first stories I started encountering were at the hotels, obviously, because that's where I was staying. The Terracin has no shortage of those, built in 1911. One night we were doing a ghost talk there. Group paid me to do a nice fireside chat, and just as we get ready to start talking about ghosts, the piano starts playing on its own. That's always a nice little perk when these things happen during a talk. I've hosted a lot of travel writers. The Tourism Bureau will have me will pay me to take these travel writers out from all around the country. And it's just fun, again, watching these experiences that people have had. One night we were talking a lot about Hemingway. We were out on the Pointer going around Harbor Springs. And then one of the writers said, last night I was staying at this hotel in Bayview and I woke up and my feet were getting tickled. And kind of everybody was giggling a little bit. And then this one gentleman, he was dressed like Crocodile Dundee. He had a leather hat on, a leather vest. He had shark's teeth around his neck. And kind of the last guy I was going to expect to give me a ghost story. But he said, I woke up last night and I was staying in the same hotel. And at the foot of my bed was a man with a stovepipe hat from like the turn of the century. He goes, and I watched this guy for a long period of time. I thought the other people were going to start laughing at them. The next thing I know, all of them are sharing the experiences they had had. And of course, they were staying at the Terrace Inn that night. I asked that gentleman, which room are you staying in? And he said, well, I'm not sure the number. You go to the second floor, you turn right. There's a little corridor there. Well, it's 211. And that's one of the rooms that seems to get most of the activity. I just had a guest 2 or 3 nights ago. We were still doing some walking tours downtown. And she had used the restroom in the middle of the evening at the Terrace Inn. And as she looked up at the shelf, this figurine that was on the shelf moves 2.5 feet to the right. Kind of caught her attention, apparently. And I asked her, which room are you staying in? Well, 211. It seems that little area in the hotel on all 3 floors tends to get a little bit of energy there. We had a group here one time, and a friend of mine specifically was married at the Terrace Inn. 1 year later, her and her husband went back to have their anniversary there. She wakes up in the middle of the night, room 211, and she hears a man walking around the bed. She's a bit hysterical. She wakes her husband up, who's a contractor. He's a big guy, about 6'3". He wakes up, he can sense what she's sensing. And he said, let's get out of here. I think it's time to go home. And she said, well, no, I was looking for a little more protection. I didn't want to just head out of the hotel. He was a little more spooked out than she was even. I've done a lot of work with the owners over there. I've known 3 of the past owners, Mo and Patty currently, but going back a little while ago, one of the prior owners, they were doing renovations in the hotel, and they're actually living in the hotel, and all kinds of strange goings-ons were happening. Faucets turning on upstairs on the 3rd floor. At this time, the hotel was at 0 occupancy. They hadn't even opened up. Things like this keep progressing. And then it was time for the grand opening. And the owner at that time was a very petite woman. And they have some vintage clothing that they keep there of the old maids' uniforms. So she thought it'd be fun to put that on for the grand opening that night. Up until then, the family had been living downstairs in a kind of a makeshift apartment. And she had a 4-year-old son at the time. And he had a little separate bedroom in the back. Well, when she put the dress on that night and they get ready to head upstairs, kind of mockingly, she said to her son, what do you think of mom's outfit? And he said, well, you look like the woman who plays with me every night after you tuck me in. And she said that was a little unnerving for her. Tara said, this is a vintage picture that I have of that spooky dining room. It's such a beautiful room, but you can play with lighting, obviously, and make things look a little different. All kinds of goings on happen in the dining room, the kitchen area also, and off to the right of this picture in the dry storage area, and then going down into the basement. They've seen women unloading packages down there. I find it quite funny that I did a presentation beginning of the year here before all the craziness happened. And there was a woman that used to work at the Terrace Inn, and she stayed there night after night after night after night. And she actually stayed there during the off season. And she kept coming up to me saying, well, I hope you're not going to talk about the Terrace Inn because, nothing ever happens there. I've been there so many years and so many nights. And then she proceeded to tell me 5 different encounters that she'd had with men in the kitchen and men on the 3rd floor. So I kind of take that with a grain of salt. This is Evelyn Hall, kind of a strange angle from that. They're doing some construction. It said Hemingway stayed in that back room there. At one point, they said Evelyn Hall was specifically for women. It said, no man shall ever enter these premises. Well, if Hemingway's staying in the back room, that kind of negated that. We had a group of Hemingway scholars in town for one of our conferences. And just as a side tour, we went through Evelyn Hall. We're walking through there and everybody was on the 2nd floor. And I had this whole group of women come screaming down the stairs. They were pretty shooken up. Lights had been going on and off on the 2nd floor. They could hear footsteps on the 3rd floor. That same year I had borrowed some clothing. They have maybe 200,000-300,000 pieces of clothing going back to the 1800s. They stored all on the 2nd floor in Evelyn Hall. And you walk in there, you can just feel this energy. You can actually smell these people that have wore these clothing for, wore this clothing for over 100 and some years. My wife and I were back there putting some chairs away, and I was, my flashlight died almost instantly, which is kind of a common phenomenon where batteries are drained. And I'm probably 100 pounds heavier than my wife. She's new to Petoskey, and here I'm kind of hovering around. I got my back to her, using her for protection. So I've been a little creeped out in that building myself. If you've ever watched any of those shows, the Ghost Hunters were here one time, and they were over at Christ Hall. Christ Hall used to be one of the 5 hotels, and now it's used as a dormitory for the kids in the summer. They started filming over there, and they had all the equipment you see on those television shows, infrared cameras and all the modern electronic equipment. And a friend of mine was hosting them. He's about 1.5 feet taller than me and maybe 50 pounds heavier. While they were filming, they had the infrared camera on, and they saw a figure come up. And right when that figure hit his legs, he literally went airborne and came crashing down on his back. When they wrapped up filming that night, the gentleman that was the head of production, he said, "This is maybe one of the more active places I've ever been in the world even." I think it just goes back to that tradition. If you've ever walked through Bayview in the winter and you see those 450 some cottages, and you just imagine if one window, one curtain were to move, man, that would send me right through the roof. Just all that energy, you can kind of feel people just kind of still hustling and bustling in Bayview, even when there's nobody there. We're going to move forward just a little bit here to Petoskey. This is one of the oldest pictures I have of Petoskey. This is by 1873, 1874. Really just a bunch of stumps in the streets. We have the Cushman House, which will become one of the bigger hotels in town. By the 1800s, 1880 specifically, we've got 13,000 trains coming through our area, bringing about 250,000 visitors to Petoskey. Here's the trains over at the Penn Station, which unfortunately just suffered that trauma from the tornado we had this year. But you can see that there's 4, 5, 6 tracks. At any given time, we would have so many trains coming through here, one every 3 to 5 minutes, bringing hundreds of thousands of visitors, like I mentioned. And we also have, here's a bigger view of the Cushman Hotel. We've got roughly 17 hotels by 1880s, 17 saloons, and 17 attorneys. So everything worked out pretty mathematically correct. But fire was a big problem up here. This is the National Hotel, which is where Items used to be, just 2 doors down from where my store is right now. And I actually lived in the apartment that's just been refurbished on the left side of this picture. Not long after this picture was taken, though, the hotel went up in flames and people were seen jumping out of the windows. Pretty traumatic when these hotels would go up in flame. Women wearing all that clothing. When you have an open fire in a hotel like that, and you have a bunch of cloth and you have the wind blowing, for instance, the Clifton Hotel, the curtain blew, caught one of the flames, and the whole building went up, and a lot of loss of life, unfortunately. This is the Exchange Hotel looking at the National Hotel, and this is right here by the hole in the ground here looking up Lake Street. So again, the hotels just kept coming, and people are spending about $1 to $1.50 a day. And all these hotels in these pictures will have burnt at least once and then been rebuilt within just a couple months. The Grand Hotel was built in just 3 months specifically. As we're looking at the Arlington Hotel, which is what we named our jewelry store after, the Arlington was just as big as any hotel in the area. It was big as the Grand Hotel. Just a very beautiful hotel. And unfortunately, like all the other hotels in the area, this is a fire in June of 1916. Thank God nobody was in the hotel that day. It was an insurance fire from what they can tell. Otherwise, there would have been 700 people. After that, the city said no more wood hotels. Well, the Perry was built in 1899, so prior to the fire. This is the Perry with the extension on the far right. 1905, they built that extension, but it was built as the first fireproof hotel. They had electricity and they had steam, so it kind of eliminated all of that terrible risk of having open flames with all that cloth on the women walking around those beautiful dresses. Right across the street is Penn Station. That's a pretty good shot there. And it wasn't uncommon for people to get hit by trains all the time here. One gentleman specifically, and you can look at these records through Greenwood Cemetery and look at all the old newspaper articles, which was pretty interesting. I find it very interesting, little bits of our history. But we know of a man that was crossing right here, and he was cut in half, unfortunately, by a train. He floundered in the street for a few minutes before he eventually passed away. And that might lead us to the same, it might be the same person that's been reported over and over again in the Perry Hotel that walks around in a blue suit. He's seen on the 3rd floor. He's seen in the Noggin Room during construction and remodeling 2 years ago. He was seen quite a few times. The man looks like very much like a real entity, like an actual human being coming at you in this nice kind of outdated blue suit. But when people look down, they notice that he's lacking legs. So that's kind of my hypothesis as to maybe what's going on with that gentleman. One of the more popular and well-known entities in the building, if you believe in these things, is the old woman that hangs up in the library named Doris, and she's been seen quite a few times. There's also women walking around through the halls wearing Victorian clothing, and they experienced them again when they were doing remodeling a couple of years ago. A friend of mine used to work there 20 years ago, and he had seen the women several times. He said, "Oh, the women in Victorian clothing, we just get used to them." Well, if they're wearing Victorian clothing, they've probably been there for quite a while. The one story that I started hearing back in 1999 when I first started coming to the hotel and staying there myself, and this picture you're seeing right now is the original. This is the original layout of the Perry Hotel. Not much has changed except the room where the Raycraft room is. That was a private residence for a while. Then it was boxed up and it was lost space for a while during Prohibition. They had gambling and roulette wheels going on in there. But there's a little girl in the hotel that's made herself quite known. And she runs around in the lobby. She's been heard on the third floor in the Noggin room. The original story that I had heard, and I've seen the pictures now, a family was staying there with their kids. The hotel was at very low capacity that weekend, and so their children are running around. They pretty much had the whole play of the hotel, and they're down here in the lobby. Well, the parents were taking pictures, and when they got home and downloaded the pictures on the computer, they started noticing there's this little girl in about half of the pictures. She has blonde hair, done like Shirley Temple, little ringlets, and she's peering at the camera. No matter whatever angle the camera's taking the picture from, this little girl's looking right at you, almost not so afraid of being caught. And her image has actually been caught in that mirror to the left. What's interesting to me also, over the last couple of summers, I keep getting reports from some of the housekeeping members over there that they, as part of their daily ritual now of cleaning up in the prime season, is cleaning little tiny handprints from the top of that mirror. That mirror is about 10 feet up in the air there. I'm not sure who's trying to trick us by putting little handprints up there, but I'm kind of going back to this little girl who's also been known to make phone calls from the top floor. One evening, the hotel was at pretty much zero capacity, and so they locked down the whole third floor. The night auditor was working that evening, and all of a sudden he starts getting phone calls from rooms on the third floor when he knows they're vacant rooms. And it's a little girl giggling into the phone over and over again, 312, 314, 316. Eventually he stopped picking up the phone. It became quite unnerving for him. This is a kind of an odd picture, but this library upstairs, and a lot of our guests will go up there and spend a couple of minutes after our presentations. And man, I always get these stories the next day. But this is kind of a famous story. One night I was up on the third floor with my daughter, and we're walking around. And as I walk around the table where the library is there, it's a really finite space. I almost tripped over this piece of cloth that was like very ornate and really just appeared kind of mid-stride, and I almost took a dive. My daughter was standing there, and I said, "Michaela, where did this cloth come from?" And she said, it literally just appeared like when you were walking. Okay, well, the next year we go back and we're doing a ghost tour, and we bring a group in there. There's probably 45, 50 people that paid to walk around town, and then we leave them at the hotel, and then they'll tell them about the experiences that happened over the course of the last year. On this particular evening, a friend of mine, Mike, was giving the talk, and he starts talking about a guest that's walking around upstairs, walks around the table right where I had my experience, and almost falls right there. And I thought, I really never told anybody about my experience up there. But in this particular case, it was a woman. And when she looked down to see what she had stumbled on, she sees a lump underneath the rug upstairs. She peels the rug back, and here's this book stuck underneath of the rug. The rug's soaking wet, and the book's bone dry. So my friend Mike gets a call, and he goes upstairs. And of course, I'm kind of relating his experience here, but he's kind of the local, the in-house ghost expert there at the Perry. So he takes the book, and he puts it on the bookshelf, and he says in jest, "Doris, if this is your book, then why don't you come get it?" And they left the hotel for the evening. The next morning they come back and the book's gone. Nothing monumental there. Well, 3 months later, 4 months go by. The Perry has a habit, part of their closings of the saloon downstairs is they take the taps off for the beer spouts, and they put them in club soda in a pitcher of bubbling water. And that clears the oxidants out, so the beer will flow like wine for the next day. They've been looking for this book for 3-4 months at this time, and all 3 employees that were working this evening have told me the exact same scenario. They go to leave the Noggin room. They've closed down the saloon for the evening. They've set the alarm, and as they're walking up the side entrance that goes down to the Noggin room, they hear a loud splashing noise. Well, they disarmed the alarm, turned the light back on. It's been a lapse of maybe 35 seconds. And here, where that pitcher of water was with the taps in it, soaking in club soda, is this book that they've been looking for months. And it's shoved into that pitcher of water, as you can see. The thing that's interesting in the other pictures I have of this is the water was full. And now you have a book shoved in there and there's no displacement. There's not a drop of water anywhere on this table. So my friend Mike thought this would be a nice photo op. He took a picture. You can live forever in paradise on earth. The Perry has a strange relationship with books kind of appearing and disappearing over course of time, and then appearing in really strange locales. And if you ever get a chance talk with David Marvin, one of the co-owners over there, ask him about the experience that he had with a book. It's kind of a long story, but it raised the hair on my arms pretty good that day when he was telling me the story. One night, a worker was getting ready to leave the Naga room, and this fork comes flying at him, bounces across the floor, and almost hits him in the foot. He bends down and obviously takes a picture of it. What's interesting to me is I'm a jeweler, I'm a metallurgist, and this is kind of cheap metal that this fork was made out of. When I have the high resolution picture, which I have here, and I zoom in on the metal, there's no distress where it's been bowed in half there. And second of all, who's throwing forks at this poor worker at the Perry Hotel? I had another friend that was there one evening with her husband, and there was 2 tables in the Naga room. If you've ever been down there, of course, you know there's all those beer mugs across the ceiling where if you spend $1,000, you get your name etched on a beer mug. It was kind of a slow evening in the winter. 2 tables, my friend, her husband, and a guest at their table, and then a table just across the room. And all of a sudden, a beer mug comes flying through the air and smashes on the floor. Waitress comes over, not too happy. Each table corroborated that it wasn't them, it wasn't the other table. And then right then another glass comes and flies over and smashes at their feet. At this point, everybody left the hotel. A couple years later, I was doing a tour here with some locals, and I mentioned the woman's name by name that this experience had happened to. And later on that night, they actually ran into her in the Naga room. I don't think she lives there, but she just happened to frequent it a couple of times. And they asked her if that story was true, and she pulled out a piece of that glass from that evening that she carried in her purse. 6 people were standing there looking at her, and right then the glass jumped out of her hand and smashed again. I now have a piece of that glass I keep here. My partner Stan at work here, he doesn't want me to bring these haunted pieces to work, but I like keeping a little collection of things myself. I have some nails from Aleister Crowley's house on Loch Ness too. I'm not supposed to bring those to work either. We had so many hotels in town. We had rooming houses and everything else, but what we were really known for up here during a period of time, we had industry, we had tourism, but we were also known for wellness. This was a place where people came to stay in the several hospitals that we had, and the spas and the sanitariums. We had Wellness Park down by the police station. If you've ever read Devil in the White City, the book by Eric Larson, he talks about the 1880s, 1890s periods. If you're living in Chicago, we're really targeting that group, Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City. We're bringing those people up here to get out of the heat of the city and also have fresh air, which is air conditioning in a sense, and fresh water. Fresh water was the big one. This is a Petoskey Hospital down by Wellness Park. In just a minute, these women will bare their naked ankles and actually walk through some of these wading pools that we had down there, and they're going to drink the mineral wells. Now, if you have read Devil in the White City, he talks about Chicago. You're the most affluent person living on Michigan Avenue. You're drinking water out of the Chicago River that's been reversed, and there are dead horses and dead cows in that water. So our quality of water up here was much better. This is Wellness Park, probably from the 1950s, but it looks much more like we can remember it now. As we were to drive down there, you can recognize that space right there. And the wading pools have been filled in. Of course, you get several places like around Alanson and Harbor Springs where they keep the water running as long as they can until it freezes. Alanson goes all the time. This is the Phoenix Barbershop, the Rough Life. You might recognize it from there. If you were coming up here and you're staying in the hotels, you've got 1 bathtub, and that doesn't mean you're going to get a fresh bath every time you jump in that water. You're probably going to be the 5th, 6th, or 7th bather. So the Phoenix Barbershop had 6 bathtubs. They had several showers, and this is about the time where people are just starting to learn that maybe taking a shower once or twice a week while you live around the biggest body of fresh water in the world might not be a bad idea. This is inside the Rough Life where the mineral wells, the spring you can see right there in Ford and Center right there. That and many businesses had these. You could get fresh water coming from these artesian wells at many of the places you stay. Downstairs in this building, for instance, though, there is an old secret passageway. There's 2 tunnels that go out the front, 2 tunnels go out the back, and this one was one of the more ornate ones. At one point, this was all etched glass. You can just make it out. It's now been drywalled over just a little bit. And the poor girl that actually worked next door at Kilwin's. She had a couple of, at Murdoch's, she had a couple of experiences down in the basement while she was working there. She knew she was the last person in the building, but yet when she looked down into the basement, she could see somebody walking back and forth in front of the light. She called her father, who happens to live in the apartment we're looking at right now. This is the Petoskey downtown offices where you pay your tickets. You're not in a great mood when you go in there. This is also the scene of what I call it, the Edgar Allan Poe Achenbaugh murder. But they lived in the apartment up to the right, and she calls her father and says, I think you need to come get me. I'm kind of spooked out here. He goes, well, you know, this is your first job. You've got a pretty good responsibility. And second of all, what are you going to do? Come home to our haunted apartment upstairs? And that brings us to 1958. And I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody that may remember the Achenbaughs, but you had Paul and his mother, Clara. Clara Achenbaugh lived upstairs in this apartment building there. There's 3 or 4 apartments upstairs. At this time, it was the Paul Achenbaugh Insurance Agency in 1958. And Claire lived upstairs. Paul had a house on Mitchell Street, and they also had a house in Bayview. He and his mother didn't get along very well. His mother was married to a gentleman that had passed away, and he was an executive for Aetna. And so he had quite a bit of money, and Paul was having some financial problems at this time and some mental problems. May of 1958, he'll sneak up behind his mother, unfortunately, with a large wrench from a semi-truck, and he'll bludgeon his mother to death. And she'll come down these stairs and land by that white arch there, the doorway there. You can't really come walking out with your mother you've just killed. So he takes her back upstairs and sort of entombs her in the wall where that circle and the cross is. These are a couple of pictures from the newspaper articles. Some pretty strange things start happening. Obviously, it's summertime. There's no air conditioning up there, and mom is entombed inside the wall. You've got him delivering groceries. He's having groceries delivered to that stairwell. He's taking the groceries upstairs. He's also having flowers delivered. He's sitting next to the body for prolonged periods of time. And then he's also burning sage and different chemicals trying to conceal the smells that people are starting to notice. There were small animals and bugs around the screens at this time. And unfortunately, there was a Kroger grocery store just beyond there, and they were actually written up a few times for unsanitary purposes because of all the things that were happening upstairs in this apartment. This is May, June, July, August. This is the hallway here. And I'm sorry for the quality of some of these pictures. We had to scan them from newspapers. This is a sheet covering Clara. She kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Here's the murder weapon. This wasn't really the crime of the century. He left the body, he left the murder weapon, and then he went downstairs to his office and took one of the Post-it notes that he had at the time that said, "Do it now, do it now." I'm sorry this had to happen, but I was drunk and I think I had been out of my right mind for some time. Paul Achenbaugh, 5/29/58. So again, not the crime of the century. Ultimately, he's institutionalized. Mayor Murphy, our mayor now, his father was a judge at that time, and he found him to be quite insane, as he confessed in his own letter. He was institutionalized in a mental facility. I believe it was Coldwater. He spends probably 24 years there, and then winds up being a driver at the motor pool at Central Michigan University. Kind of a strange turnout. This is when the coroner's inquisition came upstairs, and they're all staring at poor Mrs. Achenbaugh. If you know Richard Smith, the judge here in town, the retired judge, he was friends with Paul during this period, and he told me that he and Paul were friends, and Richard was in law school at this time, and he came home. So Richard, his father, and Paul are out golfing, and they're kind of teasing him about his mother. You know, what happened? Where's Clara? We haven't seen her. How's things getting? How you getting along with this summer? He goes, good. And he was taking a swing with his golf club. He said, I bludgeoned her in the back of the head, and she's entombed in the apartment upstairs. And Richard and his father kind of thought it was a joke, and they just kind of kept playing golf and just kind of wrote it off. later on in the season here, now comes to October, and it comes out basically what has happened. Obviously, from the pictures here, he was caught. The residual effect in that building is it sat empty for probably 20, 25 years upstairs. And then a girl that was on one of my tours maybe 4 or 5 years ago, she said, you know, back in 1982, 83, I actually answered an ad in the paper for a furnished apartment downtown Petoskey, good rates, good location. And she moved into Mrs. Achenbaugh's apartment, fully furnished because Claire is gone and Paul's incarcerated. Well, she took some of the more personal items like clothing and put them in storage. And then she had some things that she thought she actually was attracted to, some figurines, some just different things that Mrs. Achenbach had in the windows, always looking outward. That's where Claire liked them to be, was facing outwards. Well, no matter where she put these, in the morning when she would wake up, they would be back in the window cells, exactly where Claire liked to keep them. These things kind of kept progressing. One evening she heard a loud scream and she really thought it was a death scream. She was convinced it was her roommate kind of pulling her leg. Her roommate would be gone for the next 2 or 3 days before she returned home from a vacation. As these things keep escalating, she's kind of complaining to her friends, you know, man, you can't believe the experiences I'm having upstairs in the apartment. And her friend says, well, that's because you live in the old Achenbach murder house. Not what you want to hear when you're a single girl living in a house that's having some energy in it. It seems that most of the energy now has moved downstairs, and I actually had a chance to tour the basement. It's like this big labyrinth. There's 3 hallways and probably about maybe 50 or 60 rooms down there. It's a really big space down there, and it's creepy. Last year, a local ghost hunter here in town and I were on the news. I can't remember if it was 7 and 4 or 9 and 10, but they like to do a little write up every year, and we do an investigation at one of the locales around town, usually about this time of the year. Last year, it was the old Achenbach apartment. And just as we started filming, everybody had all their equipment out, all the cameras. My friend had all of his high-tech equipment you'll see on the TV shows. And one after another, everything started failing. All the battery packs, all the electronics. It was about 2.5 hours before we could actually start getting some footage. And we did pick up on some energy on some of this high-tech equipment. There was also a lady that used to have one of the salons there right in the middle. And she remembers that her husband built her a little space to sleep downstairs. They lived outside of town, and with the severe winters here, he didn't want her traveling if it was a big storm. Lo and behold, that year there was a big storm, and I actually saw this room. It's a very comfortable room. She had a private entrance coming from her salon downstairs, and she woke up in the middle of the night, and she was convinced that she was being held down by a man. Now she's hysterical. She goes upstairs, calls her husband, says, "You need to call the police. You need to come get me." And he's like, "No, wait a minute. Is there a man or is it a ghost of a man?" Well, ultimately, this goes on for about 3 or 4 hours before he determines he's not going to drive in, and he has to stay up all night long talking to her to calm her down. I just toured that basement again the other day and on a tour. One of the girls kind of got off the beaten path, and I was waiting for a response because I hear this loud shriek, and she's in the back corner where she wasn't supposed to be, and there's a bunch of old mannequins down there from the hairdressers, and she had turned her camera on and got a little bit more than she was expecting. It was a pretty benign experience, though. Since I started moving up here, people have always been fascinated, it seems, by the Club Manitou, and you'll see all kinds of false stuff online about the Club Manitou, which was a speakeasy that was built in 1929 in this log cabin, pretty unassuming. But this was actually built by the Purple Gang out of Detroit, and Al Gerhardt was the one who headed this up. When you walk inside of a normal log cabin, you don't expect to see a little guy that looks like kind of an angry Joe Pesci standing there. But this is how you would have been greeted in the early days at the Club Manitou. And again, this is all run by the Purple Gang. If you made it past Pepper, which is this gentleman's name, you'd have gone through the area where it says lounge room. You'd have gone through almost like a telephone booth that looks like a telephone booth, and you have 5 iron doors going downstairs. What you would have found downstairs would have been a very, very, very upscale Art Deco speakeasy. They have these mock licenses. I've never been able to figure out what these licenses are supposed to be because it is prohibition. Well, come to find out, these pictures are all promo pictures. The sheriff over there was paid off, and the beer and wine and liquor continued to flow all the way through the 50s over at the Club Manitou. And you really had to be sort of an affluent person to get in there. It wasn't uncommon, as my friend Rick Wiles, the historian here in town, will say, to lose $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a night gambling in that establishment. You had cigarette girls, The rooms were backlit with valances, so it didn't look like you were underground. They had ventilation systems. A lot of nefarious activity was going on in that basement. They were so protected that here's Al Gerhardt actually counting out $100 bills, and they're kind of bragging. Again, these are going to go out to publications in Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City. The historian at the Grand Hotel, he'll tell you stories about they would have the hotel would actually have their own raids. They would stage their own raids. The state police would go up there and raid the Grand Hotel, and that would hit the papers, and then people would come up in droves to come gamble at the Grand Hotel. Big bands downstairs. Here's that group again. You can see the slot machine to the left. This is me coming through one of the barricades. There's 6 or 7 major doors to get down there, and then this one slides. You've got 3 spikes on that big door that will roll closed, and actually those steel bars will lock into the holes, the reciprocating holes there, and that door weighs probably about 2,000 pounds. All these secret passageways, tunnels, everything I'd ever heard about the place was pretty much accurate. I found old containers of 50 caliber machine gun bullets. If we go back to that building now, again, I tell a lot of people on my tours, you don't have to believe in ghosts to feel the history. When you're walking through this building, there's the old safes, there's the old incinerator. The incinerator supposedly was used to burn the betting receipts at the end of the night. But it's a very, very large incinerator, and I'm told that not just one person had probably found their way into that incinerator over the years. These vaults are also good places to hide stuff. So if you're the Purple Gang in Detroit and you want to hide money up here, these little rooms are kind of endless. And you've heard stories probably about the tunnels that are out there. Quite a few of them have been caved in, but there are still some places to access beyond the perimeter of that building. Later on in years, that building will actually it'll be raided in 1951, 52, and then it becomes the Club Ponytail. And I think that's when the real hauntings start, with all the kids out there having great fun. You've got Roy Orbison, Bobby Vinton, the Beach Boys, all these performers coming out there. And I think a lot of local people here remember the fun that they had back at the Club Ponytail. One of the local bands remembers sneaking downstairs and finding all these secret tunnels, and it was still kind of mob run at that time, and being told if you go down in the basement again, you're going to get in some serious trouble. I've toured the upstairs also, and you'll move a picture and see a signature from somebody that was quite prevalent in their time. If we add all the other kind of things up here, as far as what I think contributed to some of the energy, you have all the maritime history up here also. And we know about all the old haunted lighthouses. Diane Stamfler has a great presentation she does in a new book that comes out, but I've been traveling through all these lighthouses for years and years and years. And it's amazing how the stories will repeat over and over again with caretakers that have no idea of the experiences other caretakers have had. You had all the maritime disasters out here in the bay also. It wasn't uncommon to lose ships. We had over 100 steamers coming around the lakes also. In addition to 13,000 trains, you had 100 steamers bringing all these people up here to get well in northern Michigan. Just because you came to northern Michigan and you're breathing fresh air and you're having nice cool evenings, well, if you had cancer, consumption, tuberculosis, any of these diseases, it didn't mean you were going to go home just because you're up here enjoying the fresh water. Stone Funeral Home has had quite a good run. We've had a very exponential amount of deaths compared to the population up here because of all these people coming and visiting to get well. My joke is that when we have groups from Ohio or something, if you're up here and you're living in Ohio and you pass away in northern Michigan, well, if the rates are the same, maybe you stick around in the Perry Hotel or any of these old hotels that were up here. Of course, we know that the lumbering was such a dangerous job also. But if you took all those lumber railroad tracks and you move forward about maybe 20 years, this would have been a good day trip out to Alanson. All these people wearing wool clothing, they're shoved into old cattle cars. This is just a dangerous, dangerous situation. And it wasn't uncommon for these people to perish on these trips, maybe from heat exposure, because these pine trees that are stuck in there aren't going to help you a whole lot. But more to the fact, it's just a very dangerous endeavor there. In the background, you see the Central House also, which is looking back across Mitchell Street, another hotel that has long gone. And then big industry up here, big explosions. This explosion rocked the Midway, which is just down here in front of Shorter's, going down towards the water, which is where all the commerce and industry was. And then, of course, the next day, everybody's coming back and looking at how this building completely exploded. You see the big steamers over on the left-hand side there. One of the local ghosts up here is obviously going to be Ernest Hemingway, and that's kind of my specialty. That's Ernest Hemingway and his friend Bill Smith, and they're walking around over in front of Fochman's department store. And Hemingway is said to haunt the City Park Grill. The whole second seat from the end, I'm not sure about that. This is the time period when Hemingway was in here. This is during Prohibition. That's the City Park Grill there. There's spittoons. There's no chairs at this point. And when I first moved to town, we opened up our jewelry store in the building to the left called the Grill Cafe. 1911, Prohibition's actually, prior to the Volstead Act, Petoskey goes dry, Emmet County goes dry. You had the public option of either being wet or dry. And of course, that would have happened in the elections like we'll have next week. At this time, 1911, Petoskey goes dry. So Frank Fochman, who owns the building on the right, what does he do during Prohibition? He doesn't close down his saloon. He actually builds a building even larger to the left called the Grill Cafe, where I had my jewelry store for a while. He put this little brick wall up with an entrance on the right-hand side there. And you can just make it out, but there's a big tent inside there. And they called that the Palm Garden. And you had palm trees in there, you had a tent, and you had a drink list that would rival any place in Chicago at this time. And all of this is taking place with these secret tunnels, this whole labyrinth of tunnels, right across the street from the police station, the sheriff's department, the courthouse, and right next door to the jail. So this was, again, don't ask, don't tell. Frank Fochman is said to have hung himself in the building. He did die in the building. That's kind of what they attribute some of the energy to in that building. I don't know if he hung himself. I found the official reports. It says pulmonary thrombosis, basically. But I'm told at that time, it kind of would have been the equivalent of lead poisoning. When I first moved to Petoskey, I didn't know one single person. So I kind of pulled a Hemingway myself. I didn't sit at the second seat from the end. I sat at the last seat where all the waitresses and bartenders had to come. So I got to know everybody. And over the course of time, I started hearing about all the energy in that building. And of course, we had experienced some at the Grill Cafe at this time already, my partner Stan and I here in our jewelry store. It's not funny when jewelry comes up missing all the time and you're hunting for 10, 12 hours trying to find $20,000 worth of jewelry. And when you look for it after 4 or 5 hours, you find it exactly where you left it 5 hours prior. We had some of those experiences. But the City Park, one of the first stories I had heard about was this man in a black hat, a derby hat. A friend of mine was working there as a bouncer, 2004, comes walking out about 4 in the morning. They're getting ready to go home. Another friend of mine's the bartender. And my friend comes out from the kitchen and he sees a man in a black suit with a derby hat on, very 1920s, go dashing into what's called the Hemingway room. Well, there's no windows and no doors in that room. You just kind of have to go in a circle. So my friend Jason's convinced this is going to be an easy one. I'm going to catch this guy and we're going to go home. Well, they looked for him for over 2 hours. I can't tell you how many people over the last 10 years now have had experiences with this man in black running around through City Park Grill after hours, and sometimes even during hours. It's not uncommon to see champagne bottles or wine bottles come flying across the room. If you go back into the older days, City Park's probably the oldest building in town still in existence, other than the church that's down past the police station. That's the oldest building in Emmet County. But City Park Grill, if you get a chance, take a tour downstairs. They're not doing them right now because of the situation we're in. But that building's built on old trees. When I say trees, it still has bark on it. And when you're down there, so many bartenders have literally paid me my weight in beer to sit upstairs because they get so creeped out down there when they're restocking at the end of the night. One guy, Randy, is a Marine, loud, live, jazz, piano, ragtime music coming from upstairs. He comes running upstairs, asks me what I'm doing. I'm not doing anything. I play a pretty good guitar, but I don't play piano, and there's no piano in the City Park Grill. Over and over again, we get reports from the bartenders about live music being played when they're the last person in the building. And then Larry Rellinger, who's a local kind of a character here in town, he used to own the building. And prior to the wine guys having it, which is obviously City Park, Pallet, and Rosentos, he would collect rent from the people that were trying to make a go of the restaurant back in the 70s and 80s. And he would get these complaints that, you know, you're renting us the bar, but in the evening, somebody else there's parties going on here all night long. My friend John would get written up over and over again, crystal clean when he leaves that place at night. He's the first person back in at 11 o'clock in the morning, and it looks like a party's been going on all night long. So that's a little bit about City Park. I think there's probably 2 or 3 buildings that get the most activity in this area. And I think it's just because there's a lot of traffic there and a lot of people that are there to witness these things. And that tends to be the Perry Hotel, City Park Grill, Julian Tomatoes, up above the Normal Business College. Jennifer Shorter says her building has some activity. In fact, I don't know many merchants downtown that haven't experienced a little bit of the phenomena where you go home and you come back and the next morning and there's stuff off your shelves, stuff's been strewn across the floors, and you just put it back together and start the day out again. This is a secret passageway. Whoops, I'm sorry about that. This is a secret passageway that would have taken alcohol from the basement of the City Park Grill into the Palm Garden. This is a reciprocal one. There's a tunnel down here. This is the building next door. This is bringing liquor out into the Palm Garden also. And then this is an old secret passageway that went to the Cushman Hotel, which had become quite popular and quite large at this time. So by the time you crossed through that gate right there, you would have been in the Cushman Hotel. All kinds of activity down in the basement here in City Park Grill. We set up all the infrared cameras and sensors and caught all kinds of activity over the years. But that passageway goes right here into the Cushman Hotel, and you can see how close of proximity is between there and the Perry Hotel. I'm sorry, the City Park Grill. You're very easy just to go underground there and pass between the two. The Cushman, unfortunately, will play part of our last story here coming up in just a second here. The Cushman took over. They had, I think, 45 rooms built in brick to house a fireproof annex after the Arlington Hotel burned. So they needed more hotel rooms up here. And again, nothing could be built out of wood. In 1928, ironically enough, the fireproof annex will burn almost down to the ground, and the Cushman will only sustain maybe 10% damage. But in 1933, 1934, it became no longer viable during the Great Depression, and that hotel is actually buried right where it is right now. The donor that gave us the Hemingway statue, Mr. Dow, he wanted to resurrect all these towers, all these pillars that are going back on that beautiful hotel. Charlevoix, just a little bit of fun thing. The weather vane, I hear all kinds of stories about the weather vane being haunted. And my personal opinion is, I know there was a big shootout there among the Mormons that had taken over Beaver Island, Strang and his group that didn't believe in polygamy. Of course, you've got how many women in this picture and one man? But Strang and his group came into Charlevoix one time, and the story reads like a movie. I can't believe it hasn't been made into a movie. And there was a pretty violent shootout right there at the mouth of the river, right where the weather vane is now. And I think maybe that's a little bit of the energy. Actually, one of the Porters and Ingalls were injured, which two of the first European settlers here in northern Michigan, in Petoskey specifically, were wounded in that shootout that day. So that's part of King Strang's group there. And then Charlevoix, Castle Farms, the Loeb Leopold murders. If you know anything about that, the two kids, they're very smart. They met here in northern Michigan, we'll go back to Chicago, and we'll try to commit the perfect murder. Since we know their names, we know it wasn't the perfect murder. The building fell into quite a bit of disrepair over the years before it's been renovated the way it is now. One of the construction workers told me he was on the backside where most of the weddings take place, in the courtyard. And he was up there working alone. Most of his crew had gone home and he wanted to finish the project. He looked down and he saw 5 women walking through the walls that had just been reconstructed. They weren't aware that that's where the new configuration was. He was so scared, he left $45,000 worth of equipment in the rain when he went home that evening, came back the next day, and all of his coworkers knew he was serious because of the fact he never would have left all that equipment out there. And this is pretty much my last story here. This is an obscure history point that I came across probably back in 2016, 2017. And unfortunately, it plays well with the situation we're in here today. You can see the Cushman Hotel, and on the far right is that fireproof annex. A friend of mine is a clairaudient. I wanted to take him to this place and have him walk around and kind of test him out, see if he was legitimate, see if he had these skills that he had told me about. Now, he doesn't brag about this, but it's just kind of he hosts paranormal conferences up here, and he's pretty well one of the more well-known ghost hunters in our area. Well, I came across this obscure piece of history, and I took him over here. I had him walk through the courtyard. Of course, that's where our park is now, Penn Park. And we're walking through, and we spent maybe 10, 15 minutes, and I asked him, okay, John, what are you picking up? And he said, I feel a strong military presence here. I said, you mean like the cannons that are right here on the right-hand side? No, something specifically different than that. I see girls in beautiful dresses lined up in a row. And he said, the last thing I can see is the hotel. I see it in its configuration before the fire, after the fire. And he said, but what really confuses me is I see something like I've only seen in Gettysburg, where a house had been converted to a hospital and the hospital had been converted into a morgue. And then he said, I know none of this makes any sense, but that's what I'm finding. Well, that perfectly coincides with this little rare bit of history that I came across, and Rick Wiles has now documented this in the Mackinac Journal. And in 1918, unfortunately, this group of soldiers comes to Petoskey, and they're very handsome, and they just returned from World War I, and they've been recommissioned to come to towns via train, and they're selling war bonds. And what they would do to kind of make some excitement is they would host a party for them. And this particular party was hosted at the Cushman Hotel. So you get these handsome soldiers standing around, and then all the girls in town, all the shop owners' daughters are in town, all waiting for a chance to dance with these very handsome soldiers. After the whole day's party, which goes on all through the night till the next morning, maybe 2 days later, these soldiers leave town. We have 6,000 people in Petoskey at that time, and roughly 1,000 caught the Spanish influenza. Those soldiers were all carrying the virus, unfortunately. The Cushman House, instead of taking the people that were contaminated, they didn't take them to the local hospitals, which we had 4 of at that time. They turned the Cushman into a hospital. And then unfortunately, between 36 and 45 people, depending on which report you read, will perish. And of course, they were very superstitious and concerned at that time. And so they turned a portion of that hotel into a morgue and housed those bodies for a prolonged period. So I don't want to be too morbid, but just kind of reflects on the situation we're in here right now with the mask and everything. And so I hope everybody's safe, and I'm glad we're doing this virtual tour tonight. And feel free to join me in the spring at any time, and mention that you were part of this presentation, and I'll give you a half off to walk around and tell you some more ghost stories.
Great, thanks, Chris. That was very interesting. I don't see any questions in the chat. If anybody has one, they can put one in there before we log off, or feel free to unmute your microphone if you have a specific question.
That's very good.
No question, Chris. Just wanted to say hello. It's Nancy.
Well, hello, Nancy.
And Bill, too.
Absolutely. Very good, Chris.
Maybe you'll join me for the Hemingway one, and you can pipe in for sure.
Absolutely. We'll be there.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're doing well.
We are.
Good to hear your
Hear
voice.
you. You too. Bye.
Oh, Chris, you have a question. Where exactly is the Pony Club?
Okay, so the owner likes to kind of stay under the radar. There's all kinds of stories about it being where the township hall is on Pleasant View Road. But let's just say if you were to head over by Pleasant View by the airport, there's a beautiful little log home over there, and that's the old Ponytail Manitou. So many people remember having joining those parties over there. A woman 2 nights ago, she's like, I saw Roy Orbison there. He was phenomenal. But yeah, it's over off Pleasant View, and Pleasant View was rerouted at one point, and so the house is kind of hidden, but there's a lot of lore about the tunnels that go back to the township hall, and they don't go that far, but there are probably 4 or 5 houses there that do have connecting tunnels. And if anybody knows modern rock, Iggy Pop, his name was Jim Osterberg out of Detroit. He played in a band called the Iguanas, and they were here, and he got in trouble for sneaking around with girls down in the tunnels down there.
Okay, so in the chat, I've got lots of feedback, Chris, that people really enjoyed it. A couple more questions.
Sure.
Someone's asking if these pictures are available to view somewhere around town.
Yeah, so this is a collection. Little Traverse Historical Society has quite a few of these. The Michigan Hemingway Society works with the Clark Historical Library at Central Michigan University. And I think 6,000 to 8,000 of these old glass slides and postcards were scanned and then brought back up here. So the Historical Society has been pretty good about sharing them. And then I have a very good collection of pictures that even they don't have. So I've been collecting these. You can always stop into Arlington Jewelers. I'm very happy to share these pictures with people, writers, just individuals, just historians here in town. So yeah, you can stop in here. I'm more than happy to show them and share them. Last year I had to do a presentation for the Genealogical Society here in town, and boy, they have some heavy hitter historians. So I had a whole section where I said, you tell me, because I had probably 50 photographs I could not ID. So I've been able to gather all that other information too. So I find that sharing works both ways when it's reciprocal like that.
Somebody's asking if the Mason building on Lake Street is haunted.
I have heard, yes. No, I haven't toured that building yet. It just looks spooky, and I'd like to. And again, these buildings that don't have a whole lot of activity during the day, and where people kind of to witness these things. But I've been told that I've heard some great stories about the Normal Business College here, which again, that's a school. So I know, for instance, one woman used to walk 5 miles in the snow just to get to school. It was very important for her. So again, going back to places of higher education, I think she invested so much in that building across the street there, which is now condos. So we get stories about there. We get stories about J.C. Penney. The J.C. Penney stories are really, really interesting. It'll be kind of cool to see what happens with the building now. Such an unfortunate loss for our community. But yeah, there's probably 40, 50 other places around town that I know of that, and oddly enough, what I get the most stories about is the hospital, McLaren Hospital. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have had experiences in the old section of the hospital up there. In fact, the girl that just rented my former apartment here in town, she told me she's an overnight nurse there. And I said, well, have you ever had any experiences? And that's my first question when anybody says they work overnight in McLaren. And she said, yeah, how about last night, for instance? She said, I was in acute care. At about 8 in the morning, my shift was over. And she said 6 of the patients said, is there anything you can do about those little kids that have been running around screaming all night long? So
Wow. We also have a couple people asking where the Cushman Hotel was located.
So the Cushman, if you go to City Park Grill has a ledge outside in the driveway that goes to Meyer Ace Hardware. If you look at that ledge, underneath of it, it's actually being braced by old limestone foundation, which was the Cushman. The Cushman would have started right in Penn Park, where the flags are, monument section, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And that section to the right in this picture is actually Meyer Ace Hardware, reconstructed to only be half as high. If you were to go in Meyer Ace Hardware and go down in the basement, you can actually still see safes from the Cushman Hotel.
Great. Somebody said they thought that the Ponytail burned down.
Yeah, so the Ponytail had a pretty good fire. The roof burned off in one of the stages, but there's a lot of infrastructure still there. 2 of the main bandstands are still there. The bandstand's still down in the basement. 2 outdoor ones, the brick walls are still there. There's old fountains and old chains. And I mean, these chains are huge to keep certain people out during the 1930s. But yep, it's there's still a lot of integrity out there.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, someone wants to know when your next in-person tour will be, Chris.
You can book them anytime. I'm going to take a break just after the first. I'm only doing groups of like 4, 5, 6 of family members and distance each other, and I can do tours that are not just ghost. I'd like to share the history and a little bit of Hemingway, a little bit of just of everything. So you can kind of book a tour through PetoskeyYesterday.com, or you can just call me here at the jewelry store, Arlington Jewelers, and I'll take out groups of private groups anytime.
Someone's asking where they can find information on the Hemingway presentation, and I can answer that. If you go to our website, it's ncmclifelonglearning.com/events. That will bring up all the events we have coming up, and then you can search Hemingway and you can register there.
And I do have one disclaimer too on my end. All these people, now that I've collected these stories, will come to me and say, what do I do about the ghost in my house or the ghost in my building? I'm not a ghostbuster. I just like to keep documents on these. So if you're experiencing these things, you can share the story with me, but I would contact somebody that's a little bit more knowledgeable in the area of trying to get rid of these entities. And all my tours kind of start with that same thing I mentioned earlier, whether it's tours of Bayview, just history tours, or the ghost tours. It's the tradition up here, the tradition that's tied us all in here. We all love this area. If you're living in Bayview and you bring a friend from New York and you open up that cottage and they walk in there the 1st of May, and you're like, oh man, you love that smell of your cottage that first day of opening it up. But they may be a little bit concerned, but it's the tradition up here. You've got 6, 7, 8 generations in some of these families that have been coming here. So I think the love of our area, we have such a special area up here.
We do have a couple more questions. Do you have time, Chris?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Someone's asking if you know of any residential homes downtown that are haunted.
Yeah, several of them. And there's been some really interesting ones. One gentleman had a farm just slightly outside of town here. And so yeah, a lot of houses. The farm one got me because he had experienced a lot of things growing up. Later on, the more modern house, the older house had burned down. And he comes home and there's a bunch of firemen outside of his house. It's burning. And one of the firemen was very upset because he said, I thought you said there was nobody else in the house. And the mother said, there's nobody else in the house. Everybody's accounted for. He goes, then who's the little boy that we keep seeing running from room to room, hiding underneath the bed as we're trying to extinguish these flames? You know, we got guys up there that are risking their life. And the mother said, that would be my son who died in the old house that used to be on the same location. And then there's a couple more residents here. And this is a theme that I've heard over and over and over again. A lot of activity in the house. And all of a sudden they get a knock on the door from a family member. You know, my grandfather used to live here, passed away. Can we just take a look inside the house? Sure enough, they get a nice tour of the home. And then from that point on, no activity in the house, just like just almost needed something to kind of settle the energy.
Someone is asking, what was the building at the end of Penn Plaza in one of the first photos you shared? I'm not sure if you know what they're referencing there.
I'm not sure on that picture there. So Penn Plaza, that's pretty much, there was one train station there earlier and that burned down. And then the one that we have here now that just took the hit with the tornado is probably 1890s or so, but the original train station was 1874. And then you had that awning that was built there. And the awning, they saved the awning, put the businesses underneath. And I think in one of the pictures, we're looking back towards the City Park Grill and Cushman Hotel. And we had another train station that was there. It was the suburban station. And it was just a couple hundred yards from Penn Plaza.
Okay, and then somebody asked, with all the Indian activity in the area, is there any residual activity?
Yeah, so somebody on the tour a couple years ago said, I hope you're not exploiting the Native American aspect. But you know what? I've been on tours with Native American historians that don't go to Green Sky Hill, which is out on Susan Lake. They don't feel comfortable out there. They feel the Wendigo spirit, they said. Over and over again, I hear accounts about Harbor Springs, specifically going up through Devil's Elbow and those areas over there. It's such a rich history with the Native Americans. And I don't want to ever exploit any of that, but you know, it was very traumatic up here, and you had tribe against tribe every once in a while. As I mentioned, it's kind of thought we have 4 or 5 major tribes up here, but at any given time, going back 1,000 years, you could have had, like I said, 20 tribes up here, all kind of fighting for this land up here. And this was very special property to them. You know, it's how you sustain yourself with fishing, and it was a bit of a resort area for them too. So yeah, I really believe that there's quite a bit of Native American energy. I don't feel comfortable exploiting it, but I think it's definitely prevalent.
Okay, and then the final thing I have here just says, was it the Arlington Hotel? And I'm not quite sure that she must have typed that question as you were talking about something. So I don't know, how did the Arlington Hotel fit into all of this?
The Arlington was the one with that big fire going on. So just prior to the season, that hotel went up in flames. And again, they competed with the Grand Hotel. The boats came in here first. I have other pictures where they wanted to have, when people came into Petoskey, they wanted them to see the biggest, most beautiful hotel we had. And the Grand Hotel would make their porch bigger. Then the Arlington would make their porch bigger. If you go past Penn Plaza, there's that big, there's a park right there going back towards Bayview. And the Arlington Hotel would have sat right where the gazebo is right now. Would have been the lobby, actually.
Great. Looks like that's all the questions we have. So thank you again for everybody for participating, and hopefully we'll see you at some of our upcoming events. And thank you to Chris for taking time to present to us.
Thank you.
Yep. Good night.
Night.